In this video, we will create a sub to find the sum of three numbers. These three numbers will be input by the user. We're required to use three different input methods. The first method is cells, the second is range, and the third is input box. In this example as well, we will need to find the sum two different ways. The first way is by simply adding the three values. The second method, we are required to use worksheet built-in functions. In another way, sum. We also require to use to output using two different methods. The first method is using message box, and the second method is using cell or range, whichever we choose. Let's start. Since I have option explicit enabled, I will dim my variables that I'm going to need to use. So I'm dim A as double, colon, dim B as double. Notice here that the colon is simply separating two code lines, and sometimes we do this because we don't want the code to be too long, just simply in the length. So the colon is nothing but a format, is not changing the meaning of any of these declaration statements. I will also dim C as single, comma, D as double. In here, I used a single declaration statement, dim, to declare two different variables with two different data types. So I declared C as single, and I declared D as double. Please note that I declared all these variables, A, B, C, and D, right under the option explicit statement, but outside of the sub. This means these variables are global variables within that module and can be used within any sub in the module. Let's start the sub. So I'm going to create a sub called sum demo. You may call it anything else. The first, we will do the input, and the first method of the input is cells, and let's say the user has the value in B1 in sheet 1. Therefore, I wanted to make sure first that I'm in sheet 1. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to say sheets, open parentheses, and I'm going to say sheet 1 dot select. This statement is simply equivalent as if I go on the Excel interface and I will click sheet 1. Second, I will just call cell B1. So I'm going to say A equal cells B1, row index is 1 and column index is 2. That's the first method. The second method is using range. Let's say that the user will input the value of B in B2. So therefore, I'm going to say B equal range, open parentheses, quotation, B2 dot value. The third method, if you remember, as the problem statement asked, is using input box. So I'm going to say third method here is input box. C equal val, remember, because input box is a string, and I say input box, open parentheses, the prompt, which is I'm going to ask the user to enter a number, I'm going to change the title to say sum demo, and then I am not going to have any default value, and then I will conclude my statement. So in here we have three methods. The first one is using cells, the second one is using range, the third one is using input box. Note here that I selected sheet 1, so therefore I'm reading all these values from sheet 1. However, I just noticed that when the user input C, and the program is concluded, I will not know, or the user will not remember, what the value of C was. To elevate this problem, we wanted to echo what the user input into a cell on sheet 1. So now I'm going to echo the user input to make sure they will remember that later on. Simply, I'm going to say cells, let's say C1, so 1 comma 3 equal to C. Again, only I'm doing this because as soon as I hit OK in my input box and the code is done execution, I would not be able to remember what the value of C is. Another way, it's echoing the user input. Now, let's say the logic. Remember, the logic requires us to calculate the value of the sum using two different methods. The first method is arithmetic sum. That is, D will equal to A plus B plus C. The second one, it wants us to use worksheet function. So I recognize that I need another variable. I'm going to go up to my statements. I'm going to dim E as double. Now I'm going to say E equal to worksheet function dot. As soon as I do that, Excel will recall all the built-in functions in Excel that allows me to use it the same way I would use it in Excel. So I will say sum, and then open parentheses and asking me for the arguments. My argument is A, B, and C, enter. One would say, what is the difference between D equal A plus B plus C and E equal worksheet function dot sum? There is really no difference in the result. The result should be the same. We're here trying to demonstrate that you can do one thing multiple ways, and I specifically was interested in showing you how to use worksheet functions. Next part of the code is the output. Remember, we need to output using either range or cell. That's the first method. And the second way, we'll do a message box. Let's say the user wanted to output in cell C3. So I'm going to use cells C3, that's 3 comma 3, equal to D. Then in using the message box, I'm going to say message box, the sum using Excel is, and then I'm going to say and E. Let's review the code together. First, I declared all my variable because I have option explicit enabled. I declared all my variable outside of the sub. It means they are global variables and therefore they can be used within any of the subs within that module. I started my sub and I called it sub sum mid demo. And then I will say sheets. So sheet 1 dot select, meaning that I will select sheet 1, and then from that I will call cell B1. Next, I will read the second value or the value B from B2 using range. So in this case, I say b equal range dot value. Lastly, I will use an input box to receive the last input from the user. I did the echo, or I output C, just to make sure that the user will be able to see that after the code is executed. Then I simply found the sum by adding three numbers arithmetically, and I found the sum using worksheet function to demonstrate how would you do that. The output, I'm doing it two ways. The first way was to output the sum, or the arithmetic sum, into as an Excel sheet cell, and then the second way was outputting the sum using Excel worksheet function, or built worksheet function, into a message box. Let's run the code. When I run the code, it asks me to enter number. Remember, that number is C, so I'm going to say 2, say OK, and now it says the sum of Excel is using Excel is 2, and then the other one is shown there to be 2. Let's say OK, and let's go back again to the interface to really be able to rearrange this. I'm going to delete everything, and remember I have A in B1, so I'm going to put 40. I have B in B2, I'm going to put 2.5, or and then C, remember C is going to be outputted by the code. Let's run this code again. So I run and ask me for a value. For C, I'm going to put that value to be 3, say OK, and notice here it outputted C, which is I input a 3, in C1 as I have it there, and then it outputted the sum into C3 as I have it down in the code, and then it give me a message box saying that the sum using Excel is 45.5, which is equal to using the arithmetic sum as expected. Another way to run this code would be from the interface. I'm going to show you two ways to run the code from the interface. So we add a button. So I'm going to go to my developer tab. I'm going to say insert button. I'm going to draw the button that I wanted to say. It gives me a sign macro interface or window. From there, I will see here all the macros available for me that I wrote before. And then I will select the one I'm interested in. In this case, it's sum underscore demo. And I say OK. Now this button here is associated with the sum demo macro that we wrote, or code that we wrote. I can click inside the button. I can change this to anything I want. Let's say run, and then I can edit the text the same way I edit text anywhere in the cells. I can also change the color, and I can change anything that I want as far as the format. In this case, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to delete the outputs, and I will say run, and as you see, it asks me for the sum, and then I input C equals 3, it outputs, it runs the code without me going inside the VB editor. The second way to do this, to run the code, is to assign a shortcut. I will go to the developer tab, and I will hit macros, and it will give me the same list of macros, but in this case it gives me more options on the right hand side. I will select the macro that I'm interested in, or the code I'm interested in, and I will say options, and it gives me macro options and ask me what is the shortcut you want to run this code. So I'm going to say G. In this case, it's Control G will run that code. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to say close, and then I will hit now on my keyboard Control G. And you see, as soon as I do that, the code runs. It asks me to input a number. I'm going to put 3, and I will say OK. It will output the 3 again and the sum. If you want, you can actually make it Control Shift instead of just Control. So you can go to Macro, select the macro you wanted to assign or shortcut to, and you go to Option. Instead of G, you put capital G, and now becomes Control Shift G. I will say OK, and I will close. Now I will press on my keyboard Control Shift G. Before this, let's delete the output. So I'm going to press now Control Shift G, and it will run the code as before. I enter the value of C, and then it outputs, and then it outputs again in the message box.